Welcome, everyone, to the Flourishing Workplace podcast. I am Connie Jacob, and I'm very excited to have my friend Rob, all the way from the UK, who has started something fantastic that I am just so excited about because it is going to really impact mental health. Welcome, Rob.
Connie, hi. Thanks so much for inviting me on today.
Yeah, well, and we've had some conversations that have always really left me quite excited about the things that you're doing. I really believe that you're innovating in really incredible ways. So I can't wait for our listeners to find out a little bit more about what you're doing. So that's kind of where I would like to start is
Okay.
Giant. Tell us a little bit about this mission that you've started, Giant.
Yeah, sure. Well, essentially, Giant is a child of my own story. My early years were peppered with big, intimidating challenges in our family. I had to go through all kinds of different issues, including abuse and bullying and neglect and disconnection. And so for most of my life, I felt like an underdog. I felt like I was hoping and dreaming of beating overwhelming odds and coming out on top. And that's how I spent most of my days, really, most of my years, my early years. And so fast forward to adult life, I've been an independent copywriter and graphic designer for about, 28, 29 years now. And I've used storytelling principles to help all kinds of people and organizations to make lasting connections with their audiences. Now, like most copywriters, I'm naturally curious, and I've always been fascinated by human behavior, like the nature of engagement, and motivation, and the value exchange, and how people make decisions. And what intrigued me about all of that led to an engagement with some executive coaches, leadership development consultants based here in the UK, in London and Birmingham. And I initially approached them because I wanted to help them with their creative communications, but they took me on as an executive coach. And at that point, my interest in personal development just went through the right roof, just completely took off. And now, over the years, most of my work in creative communications has been business to business, and I kind of left the executive coaching to one side. But I've done a lot of public sector work over the last 5 years or so, and but that was compromised when the pandemic hit in 2020, and suddenly my pipeline dried up. And so at that point, I asked myself a question. As unwelcome as this is, what does this now make possible? And the conclusion I came to was to integrate my insights and skills and experience in personal development into a new initiative to help us recover from what has been the mother of all gigantic setbacks, a global crisis. Now, as I said earlier, I'm someone who's really interested in story. And it made sense to me to find a story to hang my new brand off of. Now, like I said, I've been kind of fascinated with, even obsessed with resilience since about 2006, but I didn't really know what it was. I didn't know that's what I should be calling it until about 2014, when a client of mine I'd been working with faithfully and serving well for about 13 years, didn't pay me about £37,000, which is around $51,000. And they'd asked me to invoice them. I'd invoiced as I was asked, and they just didn't pay. Didn't pay. Now, I'm a little geeky around the edges, so I could think about and play with the idea of resilience all day long. So from an academic point of view, but when you have to start to deal with resilience on a very personal level, it takes on a whole new dynamic when you're not just thinking about it, when you're having to feel it.
Yes.
So I've learned that over the years, a lot of giants don't defeat us because they're too big. They defeat us because they make us feel small. And at that time, I felt awful. I felt about this high. And so for me, coming up against a huge challenge like that, like the one I was facing, with all the feelings of injustice and anger and the strong urge to hide from all of my suppliers that I couldn't pay, the violation of trust. This is when, for me, resilience really came to life.
Yeah. Wow.
And I had to figure out how to function. I had to figure out how to keep working, how to keep supporting my family and recovering from a huge, ugly setback in the face of some really, really strong emotions. And what I learned during that time was that it's possible to recover your equilibrium when you're lying face down in the arena and feeling ready to quit.
Yeah.
And I learned how best we can do that. So Giant was inspired by the greatest of all underdog stories, my own, but also David and Goliath. Because for me, that story exemplifies the kind of incredible, audacious courage and tenacity for transcendence that we need when we're facing our biggest, most intimidating challenges. So that's how it all started for me.
Wow. There are so many people listening right now who could probably relate to that story, a similar story, a COVID story, just life happening kind of a story. And that is really powerful. It's so true that the resilience is found in the dirt. And I love the story of David and Goliath. I was actually listening to a podcast I think it was a week ago. It was talking about that the strength that we need for our battles, we want it before the battle, but the strength actually comes in the battle, and the giant becomes our nourishment for that. It becomes breakfast. I love that. Eat your giant for breakfast. And I was so moved by that, Rob. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking of that exact thing for everyone who's listening, going, I'm in the heat. I am facing a massive giant right now in my personal life, in my work life, and I don't know if I have what it takes to make it. And I think that your message is timely today for that. And so what do you hope to accomplish, through Giant, for people like that who are listening going, oh, that's me?
Well, I love the idea of creating a movement to help us and our workplaces. Well, not just us and our workplaces, also our communities, to be more resilient, to be bigger on the inside than life is on the outside.
Bigger on the inside than life is on the outside. Oh, that's good.
Because I love the idea of us facing these huge challenges and being intimidated by the size of them, but finding something within us that's bigger and greater.
Yeah.
No matter how small we feel, no matter how diminished these challenges seem to make us, to find something within us as we walk towards these challenges that says to us, what, I think I've got something here that can deal with this.
Yes.
And to discover that. So there's a saying that I often turn to, or adversity introduces a man to himself. I'm sure women are included in this, but I think there's a truism in there that there's something that we discover about ourselves. What was it? Albert Camus. It says, in the midst of winter, I've learned to discover that there's within me an irrepressible summer.
That is so good.
Yeah, so when we're facing our setbacks, I'm hoping that whether it's workers or workplaces or communities, we can find that that inspiration that allows us to transcend what it is that we're facing, and actually walk towards it with courage and with tenacity and with perseverance and with endurance. Like I said earlier, the catalyst for me was the pandemic, and for me that was a huge challenge, especially as my partner dried up. And I guess the pandemic's been a huge reckoning for so many of us on so many different levels, whether it's social justice, whether it's politics, whether it's the way that we care for the elderly, whether it's our health services, whether it's the way that we do work, whether it's education, racial justice, consumerism, even capitalism. All of these things have been thrown into stark relief and have been weighed and been found wanting by the pandemic.
Yes.
And so as I try to practice, there's just a maxim that I use a lot. If you want answers, ask questions.
Ooh, yes.
So the question I've been looking to answer is, how can we make sure that these troubled times of change, these times of challenge and complexity don't overwhelm us, don't overwhelm our mental and emotional health, and leave us disconnected not only from ourselves, but from one another.
Yes.
And I believe the answer is to help us to be more giant, to learn the habits of resilience, to learn the skills that we need in troubled times, so that we're bigger on the inside than life is on the outside. Because we've been left with a choice, haven't we?
Yes.
Either go back to the way things have been, and the pandemic has clearly revealed that we're not doing a whole host of things that well, or we try to create something new, something that feels much more human. And that's what I'm about with this. That's the movement that I want to create. A people who are willing to take on some of these big challenges that we haven't been able to practice yet, and bring something to the table as big as they are, as intimidating as they are, as overwhelming as they can be, and yet find something within us that says, you know what, I think I've got something here that I can bring that can make a difference.
Yeah. Wow. That's exactly it. And I love that, this is an opportunity for people to turn obstacles into opportunities. And one of the things that we often say at Flourishing here is, do you want to just be resilient? What this sounds like to me, Rob, is that you're moving people to take their resilience and turn something beautiful out of that. So for us, we say, do you want to be resilient? You want to be resilient and miserable? Yeah, sure. You're still standing. That's great. Good for you. But do you want to thrive? And what I hear you saying with this movement is it's not about just barely making it. It's about the capacity being built inside through adversity, through grit, through the hard stuff, and becoming large inside, instead of feeling small when the giant is out there. So I just absolutely love what you're doing. And I'm curious, for you, because you've faced this, and I really appreciate you sharing your own journey with us. But what would you say has been the most helpful for you to be resilient through all of this?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I think for me, one of my favorite stories, as I indicated earlier, story is a really big part of the way that I approach life, because one of the things I've realized is that, well, I'm a creative, so story is the language of imagination. And if I'm going to be creative, I need to find ways of narrating how people get from A to B, and how I get from A to B, whether I'm creating ideas or trying to solve a problem for a client. And story is really important to us, just as humans, really. I've forgotten what I was going to say, but it'll come back to me in a second. story is really important to us as humans. It helps us to make sense of who we are.
Yes.
Helps us to make sense of our place in the world and how the world operates.
Yes.
And one of these great stories that I always come back to answer your question, finally, is a story by, it's a true story actually, and it comes from a chap called F.W. Borum. And he actually lived in the turn of the 19th, 20th century, and he was a English, and let me get this right, a Baptist minister, and he was on mission in New Zealand, and he was just out for a walk, and we know this from his journals. It's not a long story, but it's a really powerful one for me. And he was out for a walk, and he just happened to walk past a kitchen garden, and he looked over the wall, and in this kitchen garden was a scarecrow, and funnily enough, there were these two birds sitting, one on the left and one on the right of this scarecrow and his outstretched arms. And this, of course, tickled him. But in a flash of inspiration, he said to himself, I'm going to call that bird the wise bird. I'm going to call that bird the foolish bird. And if I was a foolish bird, I would fly around, see a scarecrow, listen to my fears, and then fly away. But if I was a wise bird, I would fly around looking for scarecrows, and despite my fears, fly towards it, because I would know that there's treasure waiting hidden for me in that field. And so to answer your question, that story has been really important for me, because as I suggested earlier, when you're going through a tough time and there is this huge heat of feeling and emotion that can really rise up sometimes really suddenly. And we're in this high state of alert, and we're not sure how, well, our brains get scrambled for one. So it's really hard to make decisions. And one of the things that story helps me to do is to pause, wait, and then think, okay, I'm feeling this really strongly, but maybe there's something here for me. Maybe there's a reward, there's treasure waiting for me in this. And that's been really helpful in my resilience journey, really helpful for me to practice that discipline of understanding what it feels like when I'm in a state of high alert, but I'm not feeling like I'm in control, like I'm being overwhelmed. And to learn the discipline of pausing, waiting, and listening, and being really curious about what's going on, and seeing if there's something behind that state that I'm feeling, so that I can maybe even grow. Because, as I keep saying, all growth is at the edge of our comfort zones. All of it.
Yes.
And if we're going to grow, if we're going to develop, we're going to need to learn to practice what it feels like to operate at the edge of our comfort zones. Yes.
All growth as at the edge of the comfort zone. I think that is just such a brilliant statement. And you know, it's interesting, Rob, we tried to do this conversation a while ago and it didn't work. So this is take two, but I feel like this take two is exactly what people may be needing. You know, there's nothing happens by accident. And I really feel that today, you know, what you have spoken is just something that may be some encouragement for someone listening to keep going, to start looking at what is the treasure in this. You're reminding people that resilience is possible for absolutely anyone. And I just want to thank you for being on the podcast with me today, and for what you're doing and how brave that is. I mean, it's no small thing to start a movement. And so I'm sure
in a pandemic. Why not?
Why not?
Nothing else to do.
No, exactly. But it's so needed. And just know that here at Flourishing Workplace, we're cheering you on here in Canada.
Oh,
and we want people to definitely know more about you. So where can they find information on this amazing movement?
Well, I have a weekly clubhouse. So you can find me on there, and that's every Thursday, 8 p.m. UK time, 3 p.m. EST, Eastern Standard Time. So that's a regular place you can find me there. And from there, you can find me you can trace my tracks to LinkedIn and Twitter and wherever else you might want to hang out with me.
Excellent. Well, I encourage everyone to get on Rob's Clubhouse and to follow him on LinkedIn and Twitter, because he's just a spectacular human. And I'm very happy to have met you, and we'll continue to be in touch. But thank you so much again, Rob, for being with us today.
You're so very welcome, Connie. It's been great talking to you, and all being well, we'll talk again soon, yeah?
Yes.